Amazing. So we might have some technical difficulties, and I hope you will be patient with us. But we are very happy to be able to host this webinar because we know, although we have had a few launch events, starting with a launch event in New York on September 26th, and then we had another launch event on October 12th in Mumbai, and then another one in Paris on the 16th or the 14th of October, and then London on the 30th. We know that for some it's also difficult to join those events, and so we thought it would be a good idea to have a few online opportunities to discuss this issue. So, I'm not sure how I can mute participant, but I will try. But if you can remember to mute your microphone, it would be really welcome. So let me start by showing you the document. Here is the document. Sadly, I cannot give you a copy through that WebEx. But I encourage you to go on the website, and on the website, the landing page, which is unfc.org/standards, you'll be able to find both the full document, which I have here, and also a 2-pager which kind of summarize the standards. So I'm going to, the way I would like to structure our discussion this morning is maybe I will do a quick presentation, 15 minutes of, the background on the standard and the standards themselves. And then we can have a discussion. And the way to do it is that you can send me questions through chat, because there is a chat capability, and I'm going to send you a little chat now so that you see it. So there is a chat capability, so you can send me questions directly. But I think there is also the possibility to kind of get you to ask your question via WebEx, but I'm not sure how that works. But we will try that in 15 to 20 minutes after the presentation. But so I'm sending you a little chat message now saying thank you for joining, so that you see that there is this opportunity. So I think
Associate Director for Strategic Partnerships at Heartland Alliance International. Unfortunately, I'm unable to take your call at the moment, but if you please leave your name and your number and a detailed message, I'll be sure to return your call as soon as possible. Alternatively, please feel free to call the Heartland Alliance home office at 312-660-1300. Thank you for your message.
Okay, I just muted, so that's exactly what I meant. That's exactly what I meant when I said that we would have a few technical issues that I didn't know how to mute someone, but I did manage to mute Michael Castellano. So now we have a chance to start that presentation. So I hope you are all seeing my screen now, and you can see that first slide. I would be very grateful if you have the opportunity to tweet using the hashtag #BizForLGBTI, because of course one of our objectives is to raise awareness among companies and also among civil society on the existence of this standard. There is no point in us having developed a standard of conduct for the private sector on LGBTI issues if nobody ever hears about it. So, and that's part of the reason why we are doing these launch events and we are trying to get some press coverage, is that we want to go beyond having the big usual suspect companies being aware of the standard of conduct, but reaching more and more to the medium-sized company that might not have started the journey on LGBTI issues, but are interested. So So let me start, let me start on a positive note with this slide, which, as most of you are aware, we have seen tremendous social change in the past 25 years. And, in particular, 50 countries have decriminalized relationships. Okay, may I remind you that if you can mute, I would really appreciate. I think I have the possibility to mute you, but I'm not very good at it. But that's it. I'm muting a little bit. So we have seen tremendous progress. And 50 countries have decriminalized homosexuality. Another 67 have banned discrimination based on sexual orientation. And then another important number of countries have approved same-sex union and even marriage. So, of course, this is great progress, which most of us could not expect, including the pace of progress. However, as you know, this progress has been uneven. And it has been uneven geographically. A lot of the progress has taken place in Western Europe, in the United States, in Canada, in Latin America, but entire parts of the world seem to have made only very marginal or incremental progress. And then besides that, the progress has not been uniform, in the sense that gay and lesbian people might benefit more in some places of the world of this societal change than transgender people, than bisexual people, than intersex people. And so a lot remains to be done. But something that we're also extremely aware of at the UN Human Rights Office is that there is increasingly a shrinking space for civil society. And then the wave of populism that we observe in many parts of the world has led to some sort of a backlash against LGBTI people. And in some countries, we have observed important backward steps, whether it's new legislation, draconian legislation targeting LGBTI people, or the mass arrests that we have all witnessed in the past few months in Azerbaijan, in Egypt, and in other parts of the world. And then the hateful rhetoric by politicians is something that we cannot ignore. Just here in the United States, all this talk about bathroom laws, which we know are never about bathroom, but are always about hate, have a tremendous impact on transgender people and their well-being. So, without wanting to be negative or dramatic, we have the feeling that we are entering a dangerous period for LGBTI people. And therefore, we have to concentrate on defining new strategies and tactics so that we keep the momentum we have known in the past 25 years, but we are also achieving progress in more difficult places. And sometimes that's something that we forget, is that, societal change, what we have observed is that, when you register progress in some parts of the world, the incremental change becomes more difficult. So, that graphic is not very interesting, besides the fact that it required a little bit of our time back in the days to develop it. But what it shows is that criminalization of homosexuality throughout the world and throughout time. And what we observe is that, I don't know what that is, but what we observe is that, of course, criminalization grew with colonization. And then, quickly around the 70s, and particularly, at the beginning of the 90s, we started seeing decriminalization and a fast pace of decriminalization. Well, in the past few years, what we have observed, and it can be a little bit anecdotal, but is the fact that the pace of decriminalization has slowed down. So, when we are talking about, I wonder if my screen share is still working. Is it still working? No? Okay. So sorry about that. I told you that I would have a few technical issue. So I wanted to, how do I do that? What is that thing? Sorry about that. Just give me one little minute. I'm sure I'm doing much better. Restore layer. Very interesting. Share screen, share my screen, share screen. And then now I go back to my slide and I do that. And I go back where we were. So, you know, in this context where we are observing some backlash against LGBTI people, and we are also concerned about keeping the pace and the momentum that we have known for the 25 years. You know, it's important to think about the strategies for the future, particularly at a time where the governments that have typically championed the human rights of LGBTI people, and in which governments I'm thinking about, are also taking a step back. And in a time of economic transition, it might be a long-lasting strategy, which is, you know, a lot of them call it realistic foreign policy, and it's basically decided that human rights are going on the back burner. So, you know, in that context, one of our thoughts is that the private sector has a tremendous role to play. And it's something that at the United Nations we have always believed, and this was formulated when in 2000 the United Nations launched a Global Compact. The Global Compact is the largest civil society corporate social responsibility initiative. I think it has more than 13,000 participants. And is, you know, it's not only on human rights, it's about companies fulfilling their societal goals. It looks like I have to do a little more muting around here. Doing that should help remove the background noise. Yeah, I'm not very good at it. So if you are online, grateful if you could mute your mic. Because we have a little bit of background noise. I'm trying to figure out which language is being spoken in the background so that we can punish the guilty person. Well, it looks like we are going to have to live with that background noise for a little while. Sorry about that. I tried to mute, but it didn't work. Anyway, so, you know, after the Global Compact took off, you know, in the beginning of the year 2000, the United Nations took an extra step, which was to spell out the link between business and human rights by launching the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights in 2011, which were endorsed by the Human Rights Council, and the goal was to hold the private sector accountable when it came to human rights. So our current effort, which is the standard of conduct for business and tackling discrimination against LGBTI people, is really the translation of those two documents, the Global Compact and the Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, for the question of human rights of LGBTI people. And you know, the idea is that when you have conversation with business, of course, you know, maybe not in Western Europe and in the United States, but in other parts of the world, there's not always an understanding that LGBTI issues is a human rights issue. Very often business believes that it's about corporate values, or it's about pushing, you know, Western social agenda. And so we feel that it's important for business to understand that this is a human rights issue like any other human rights issue. And that if you are if you're a business and you want to fulfill your responsibilities when it comes to human rights, you cannot pick and choose which human rights you are going to be supportive of. And you know, so our goal was to translate the Global Compact when it came to the human rights of LGBTI people. And in fact, one way we formulate it, and it's the name of a session we are going to have in Geneva next week, or in 2 weeks at the UN Forum on Business and Human Rights. we said, bringing an LGBTI lens to the UN Global Compact. So I would like to remind you that if you're online, I would be very grateful if you can mute your microphone because we still have a little bit of background noise. Although it's very difficult to know where that background noise is coming from. Now, I don't hear that background noise. That's amazing. So now, the way we showed it on that graph in the document itself is that companies have responsibilities and opportunities when it comes to the human rights of LGBTI people in their interaction with 7 different types of stakeholders. And what it means is that it's a two-way street, and I think it's important when we talk about the role of civil society in using the standard, is that civil society also frame the way business deal with human rights by holding business accountable, but also in the way they act in their relationship with business. But so what we feel is that business have an opportunity to also shape human rights in the places where they are having operations. And of course, the first thing that a lot of us would think about is in their interaction with government and lawmakers, which is a big agenda. We have noticed increasingly that when business raise issues against abhorrent laws, and we have seen it, in the case of HB2 in North Carolina, it has an impact. We have seen it, in Uganda. We have seen it in the Kyrgyz Republic. The private sector can play a role in shaping the thinking of government and lawmakers when it comes to human rights of LGBTI people. But that's not the only thing that business can do. Business can also contribute to societal change on LGBTI issues. And one example that I love, when we are chatting, I would send you the link. But one example that I love is Procter & Gamble Touch of Love advertising that they run in India. And it's this 3-minute video that feature a transgender person and her adoptive daughter. And it was a huge success. It got more than 10 million views on YouTube, and it got a lot of press. And what it achieved is that it started a discussion on LGBTI parenting. And it kind of challenges prejudice that people might have against transgender people being parents. And that's sometimes much more than we can do, meaning, multilateral organization or civil society organization won't, because the private sector has money, the private sector has influence, the private sector managed to get in households through advertising and through their product. And so, they can also shape public attitudes when it comes to human rights of LGBTI people. And of course, businesses can have an impact on their shareholders, and shareholders can shape the way businesses deal with the human rights of LGBTI people. But businesses can have a big impact on their suppliers. And we have seen that all the time. As an example, Starbucks has a very strong supplier policy, which is that their suppliers cannot discriminate against LGBTI people. Similarly, trade unions are extremely important because trade unions in many parts of the world remain extremely powerful, and they can shape the way business deal with the human rights of LGBTI people. And then staff, is another aspect that is very important, of course, because businesses have a tremendous impact on the well-being of their employees and on respecting their human rights. But the other aspect is that staff, when they are empowered by the company on human rights of LGBTI people, can play an advocacy role. And so, I like to say that today there is 26 businesses, very big businesses that have expressed support for our standards of conduct, and they represent 2.5 million employees. And what I like to say is that those 2.5 million employees have now the potential to be ambassadors for the human rights of LGBTI people wherever they are working, and also in their family and in their community. So, I'm kind of repeating the obvious, which is that the private sector has incredible opportunities to contribute to the societal change we want to achieve, and that all the stakeholders around the private sector, including civil societies, have a huge potential to affect the way private sector deal with the human rights of LGBTI people. So now on that slide, I just gave a few examples of how we have observed recently the power of the private sector. So one example that comes to mind, and that has been pretty well repeated in the media, is the example of House Bill 2 in North Carolina, which was a law that tried to prevent transgender people from using the bathroom corresponding to the gender with which they identify. So clearly it was a hate law. It's never about bathroom; it's always about hate. And a great coalition of companies took a stance against LGBT2, and if you look at the private sector, it included companies like PayPal, Deutsche Bank, Bank of America, Citibank, just to give some name of financial companies. And what we observe is that even though it didn't have a direct impact on LGBT2, it had an impact on neighboring states that were considering passing the same hateful laws, but that realized that they didn't want that backlash from the private sector. So that's also something that we observe in Uganda, right? In Uganda, famously, in 2012, Uganda passed this anti-gay bill, and Barclays and other company such as Virgin or Citi kind of took a stance. And more famously, the World Bank withdrew a big loan that it had planned for Uganda. And even though, again, it was perceived at first as giving a political boost to the political sponsor of this abhorrent law, it had a huge impact on neighboring countries. So, common knowledge is that the Kyrgyz Republic or Ethiopia were considering similar laws, and they thought twice because their objective is to attract foreign direct investment, and they thought, do I really want? Is it really worth it? So, often what we observe is that those coalition of companies that take a stance on human rights of LGBTI people, it has kind of this ripple effect, which is that other states or countries that are considering attacking the human rights of LGBTI people think twice about it. Then you have the good example of Singapore, a country where homosexuality is criminalized, that organize every year this Pink Dot event, which is basically their gay pride, and multinationals have always been sponsoring it. So the Singaporean government now forbid multinationals to sponsor the event. And what we saw this year is that a coalition of local companies actually raised even more money than the previous year to support the event. And there again, so on that slide you see a Pink Dot event with all the logo of the big companies that were behind it. And there again, that's something that we speak about in the fifth standard in our document, which is this idea that you can shape the debate, and you can contribute to the debate outside of the walls of your company. And then, my last example, which I think was very courageous, is after, there was a schizophrenic experience in India in which the criminalization law was taken down by the Delhi court, and then eventually it was upheld 1 year later. And, a few companies took advertising to express their support for the repeal of Section 377, even though the Supreme Court had taken a decision to uphold it. A lot of companies are advertising expressing support for the repeal of 377. And what we know is that when it comes to legal decision, judges look also at what's happening outside. And when they see that the private sector is embracing the human rights of LGBTI people, it also sends a pretty strong signal that can have an impact in the medium term. So, even though our document is about the human rights of LGBTI people, and we believe that companies can and should contribute to social change on this human rights issue, we reiterate in the document the famous economic and business case. And the reason is that when we did the consultation on the standard of conduct, and we did consultation with civil society and business people in several places. We had a consultation in Mumbai, in Kampala, in New York, in Brussels, and we had virtual consultations. Over and over, we heard that shareholders, management, economic and business case, they like to argue that the reason why the private sector should take a stance on the human rights of LGBTI people is because it's good for them. So there is a lot of studies out there. I'm not going to repeat it because I believe that the economic and business case has been extremely well articulated. But Kenji Yoshino at NYU, which is down the street from us, has shown that at the micro level, of course, employees are doing much better in a supportive environment. And, it means that they have better health outcomes, they have increased job satisfaction, they have improved work relationship, and they have greater commitment. And in fact, they have more loyalty to the company. And, and of course, it's not rocket science because we know that one of the key to people performing in the workplace is authenticity. It means, not having to think about putting on a facade that doesn't correspond to who you are. And it's actually studies have shown that this authenticity is what makes the difference between a successful employee and an employee that is running into difficulties. And employees, LGBTI employees only come out, are only, open about who they are in a very supportive environment. And so it's crucial for companies to continue to make this effort. Then there is the business performance case, which means that companies are doing better when they are inclusive. So that's based, of course, may I remind you that if you're on the line, please mute your microphone because we have a bit of background noise now. I'm going to see if I can mute people. I'm not very good at that. Oh, perfect. Amazing. So companies do better. There's that interesting study that Credit Suisse published last year that shows that companies that had pro-LGBT policies and culture in place outperform the market by 3%. So of course it's anecdotal. It would need to be, to take place on a larger scale to be conclusive. But intuitively we know that diverse teams and inclusive teams perform better than homogeneous teams. And that's obvious, right? Because, they get to not fall in the trap of groupthink. So that's one aspect. And then the other aspect is that, and a lot of companies, American companies like American Airlines or Marriott have understood it a long time ago, is that the LGBT market is huge, particularly in the Western world. And so for companies to take a stance on human rights of LGBTI people has a very positive impact on their well-being, on their revenues. And finally, there is, this economic case, the macroeconomic case that the World Bank has been working extremely hard on. And actually, when I was at the World Bank, I contributed to some of this research. And the idea is that economy perform better when LGBTI people get a chance to contribute, and when they don't carry the gigantic burden of homophobia and transphobia. And it decided that our individual stories as LGBTI people include some economic loss. Recently, last week, I met with this great Argentinian transgender activist, who is also a composer, and now I cannot remember her name because I have a horrible memory. But she said to me, I lost 20 years of my life. And she meant by that until, she was given the opportunity of being who she truly was, she could not reach her potential. And now she's an extremely successful pianist and composer in Argentina. And, the idea is that our individual stories is that we do not get to contribute to society as much as we can because of the transphobia and homophobia we are experiencing, or biphobia we are experiencing. Well, when you aggregate all of those individual stories, it is a gigantic self-inflicted economic wound that economies are experiencing. So the World Bank has tried to put a number on it. UNED has also worked on it. And more this research is becoming more accurate. I know that our friends at Open for Business are launching really soon a study on how cities that are inclusive perform better economically. And so, even though that should not be our argument, we shouldn't make a fetish out of GDP. We should remember that the reason why the private sector has to take a stance on the human rights of LGBTI people is because it is their responsibility. But we can also, constantly reiterate this economic and business case. So I think I'm being a little bit slow, so I'm going to accelerate so that we have time to respond to a few questions. But there are 6 important facts about the standard that are important to remember. First, they do not create new human rights obligation. And I kind of alluded to that when I said that they are the translation of the Global Compact, meaning that that companies have human rights obligation and LGBTI people have human rights. And so therefore, it's important to always keep in mind that those standards are not creating new human rights obligation. They certainly do not create special rights for LGBTI people, right? They just are telling the private sector that they should take the same step on the human rights of LGBTI people that they should take on child labor, on gender equality. They are designed to work in all organizational and cultural contexts in any country or region. And I think that's very important because in my discussion with business, and as I mentioned, 25 big companies have already expressed support for the standard. Sometimes they're asking me, they are saying, are you saying that we should be sponsoring gay pride in Sana'a in Yemen? And I'm saying that's not at all what the standards are saying. The standards are basically encouraging companies to find their voice on human rights of LGBTI people. And what we are saying is that you don't have to do everything everywhere, but when you have an opportunity to contribute to societal change on human rights of LGBTI people, you should take it. It is important, and it's not, selective corporate value. It's your responsibility. They are flexible, and users decide how to use it. When we say that, in particular, we think about the standard number 5, which is acting in the public sphere. Acting in the public sphere can take many forms. It can be, welcoming LGBTI people in your office and having them, meet with your management team. But it can also mean having, like Procter & Gamble did in India, an advertising that is changing the perception of LGBTI people. So companies can think for themselves about what does it mean for me to act in the public sphere, and how can I say that I'm fulfilling this 5th standard of acting in the public sphere. They need to be applied in a nuanced and differentiated approach, and I think that's very important, right? Which is that we should always remember that the different segment of the LGBTI population, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and intersex people, have different needs and different challenges in the workplace. And so it cannot be one size fits all. It's important to always remember what are the specific policies that will benefit a certain segment of the LGBTI population. Now, as I have mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, when we have observed some level of change on protection for lesbian and gay people in the workplace, we do not see the same level of protection for transgender people. And therefore, it's important for companies to remember that within the acronym, there is different segments with different needs when it comes to the workplace environment, but also when it comes to their human rights. And finally, companies are encouraged to support, endorse, and refer to them. So we are not asking companies to sign off on the standards, but we are asking them to express support. And it's very important because, in my opinion, you know, and we have been working very hard on that, on getting companies like Google, Vodafone, Virgin, Godrej, which has been extremely supportive in India. It's very important because I think that medium companies that have not started the journey, when they see that big companies like Google, like you know, Accenture, take it seriously, or EY, take it seriously, they start to understand, well, maybe I should start having this reflection in my office. So here are the 5 standards. They are not, you know, life-changing. I think most of us know already what they mean, right? So the first standard is to respect human rights, and it basically asks companies to do the due diligence when it comes to the human rights of LGBTI people, and also to carry an assessment of their impact on LGBTI people. The second standard, eliminate discrimination, is really about ensuring that your policies are aligned with the human rights of LGBTI people. You know, at minimum, it asks, you know, equality in terms of benefits and policies, right? And then the third one is provide support to LGBTI people. And for us, it's very important. It's this idea that it is not enough to have the right policies and procedures in place. Because LGBTI people will not ask for those benefits, and they will not come out in the workplace if they have not a supportive environment. And, you know, I was in France a few weeks ago, and it's very, very important in France. You know, people believe that when we ask that employee resource group happy end companies, or that business leaders express their support for LGBTI people, we are told that it strengthens the communitarism of LGBTI people, and that, you know, instead of highlighting their difference, they should show how they, you know, they fit the mold. But all the studies have shown that for LGBTI people to have a chance to be authentic in the workplace and to have a chance to find their place, they need more. They need positive reinforcement about the fact that they're welcome. They need an employee resource group that is funded and that has a chance to express support for LGBTI people. And very importantly, they need openly gay leaders to say, you know, it's fine to be out in the workplace. So when we talk about providing support, it's this idea that it's not enough to have the right policies and procedures in place. Then the fourth standard is prevent other human rights violation in the marketplace. And it's this idea that companies are encouraged to look at their suppliers, but also to look at their relationship with their clients. You know, and we have seen businesses that ask for the right to discriminate against LGBTI people in the way they are distributing their products and services. You know, that's a human rights violation. And then similarly, we think that it's good for business to have a look at whether their suppliers are inclusive suppliers and encourage them to also reflect the value of the company when it comes to human rights. And then, you know, the fifth standard for us is the most important standard. And it's this idea that companies have an opportunity and should act in the public sphere. And, you know, one thing that I would like to do in the next year is to find best practice in this area and try to highlight them in the paper, because I think it's important. You know, it's this idea that societal change does not happen organically. You know, we can wait and we won't see it happen. We, as a society, have to make it happen, and the private sector has a key role to play. And in a time where there is a backlash and where the previous governmental champions of LGBTI rights are taking a step back, I think it's more urgent than ever for the private sector to play that role in the public sphere. So here are a few concrete examples. I'm not going to go over them too long because I would really like to hear some of your questions. But when it comes to respecting human rights and doing your due diligence, well, if you are a financial institution and you are invested in a company that is fighting the decriminalization of homosexual relationship, which is a violation of human rights, you should consider disinvesting. Eliminating discrimination, it means having the right policies and workplace pride, Stonewall, HRC all have extremely good and thorough way to measure that companies have the right policies and procedures in place. Provide support is key. As I mentioned, one example is for Barclays to have created this Straight Allies network, right? And what a powerful signal to LGBTI employees that want to feel included in the workplace. To prevent other human rights violations is to end a contract you have with one of your suppliers that is violating human rights. So a good example was Orange, the telecom company, which has expressed support for the standard, which is one of the early supporters. They withdrew advertising from this famous Ugandan tabloid newspaper that had published the name of 200 suspected gay men and lesbians, which is clearly a violation of human rights. And then acting in the public sphere, it's taking that incremental step that might feel slightly risky, but that is going to really have an impact. And it can be very simple. So when HSBC has this very famous building in Hong Kong, and they have two lions in front of it, and for pride they painted the lion in rainbow colors. And of course they did experience a little bit of pushback. But this is a powerful signal that the private sector is expecting change on these issues. And in the discussion I have had with companies, whether it's BNP Paribas in France, which is a supporter of the standard, as a company, when you experience backlash, it's uncomfortable, but it's not dramatic. None of the companies that have experienced backlash because they have taken a stance on human rights of LGBTI people have reported losing revenues. So it's really about sitting with the discomfort. And of course, doing the right thing can be uncomfortable. And we encourage companies to accept that at times they will feel a bit uncomfortable. So this is a picture of the launch. You can see the High Commissioner in New York, and you can see the representative of the 15 first early supporters. But since then, we had another launch in Mumbai at Godrej, and here you can see a picture of the launch at Godrej with Nisa Godrej, with the executive chairperson of Godrej, and other companies. This is the London launch. You can see GE Aviation, SAP, our friend, the activist Kenita Placid, and Tim Jarman of EY with my boss, Charles Radcliffe. So when we were in London, we were very happy that we could announce another 10 companies that have joined the early supporters. So now we have 26 companies, very big companies that have expressed support for the standard, and we are working hard to be able to announce a few more in Melbourne, where we have a launch event on December 5th. So here is again the website and the hashtag if you want to tweet about it. And now I'm kind of finished, boring you with my presentation, and I have time for a Q&A. Although I'm not sure how that's going to work, but I think I'm going to go back to the chat. And now I'm in the chat, and if you want to send me questions, I want to enlarge the chat thing. I already have questions. So I'll take the first one that I see, and then send me the question in the chat, and I'll respond to it. So the first question is from Dumizo Gacha, and he said, "Is there a possibility of collaborating with listing security stock exchange forces in encouraging the guidelines, even possible integration in diversity measure within corporate governance mechanisms such as Team 4 and the UK's Combined Code?" For your first question, that's such a good idea, the stock exchange. And I actually reach out to NASDAQ here in New York, and I reach out to the New York Stock Exchange downtown. And then in Mumbai, I reach out to the Mumbai Stock Exchange, and in London to the London Stock Exchange. And, I'm going to be very honest with you. NASDAQ wanted to be supportive, but it didn't really happen. We wanted to ring the opening bell or the closing bell, and we thought it would have sent a powerful signal. But it didn't happen. We tried to do it in Mumbai and in the London Stock Exchange, and I'm going to tell you the truth, is that I feel that as soon as they started to understand what this was about, they kind of dropped the ball. And so we started sending them a reminder, and they never responded to us. And that was a bit disappointing. I think it would send a very powerful signal, because if you ring the bell or you open the bell with the standards of conduct on those issues, you're saying, human rights of LGBTI people is truly a business issue. So, I'm going to Geneva for the UN Human Rights and Business Forum next week, and I'm going to meet with the social sustainability stock exchange initiative and try to talk to them about maybe doing something together for the International Day Against Homophobia and Transphobia on May 17, and try to get all of those stock exchanges to ring the bell on this issue, inviting activists and business people. It's kind of a long shot. I think that it's kind of sad, but for a lot of people, it remains still perceive it as a frivolous issue. And, what we are trying to say is it's not a frivolous issue. It's not a question of corporate values. It's about the human rights responsibility of the private sector. So let me see if there is another question. So there is a comment from Mark Emdin of Workplace Pride. There are a number of local organizations who can provide on-the-ground support for companies that want to make a change. If they enter the discussion via the UN standard, how can you connect them with that local support? So that's a very good point, Mark. And in the standards, we constantly, in the document itself, which you can download online, but I can also send you a copy if you send me your address. We constantly remind companies that they should not, particularly in the public sphere, they should not take action without having first consulted with local civil society. And it's decided that sometimes you can take actions that are actually detrimental to the human rights of LGBTI people with the best intentions. So when the World Bank withdrew the loan in Uganda in 2012, activists were not consulted, and they said, why did you do that? First of all, you gave a political boost to Museveni, and then second of all, the last thing that LGBTI people need is the kiss of death from the World Bank. And then another thing that they argued is that the loan was for, against maternal mortality, which is a big issue in Uganda. And so, what they said is, do you really want LGBTI people to be perceived as getting in the way of reducing maternal mortality? So it's very important for the private sector to have those links with civil society, so that when they take an initiative or when they have an opportunity, they're able to bounce it with civil society. So, I'll be frank with you. Here in my office for the past few months, we have been very focused on trying to raise awareness around the standards. One of our fears is that if we don't manage to create a little bit of a buzz around them, and if we don't manage to get it on the radar screen of companies, it's just going to be forgotten. But I think, in the next step, what you mentioned is very important, which is this idea that we should start providing support to companies that want to translate their support for the standards into concrete action. So, I have a few ideas. One idea is to share best practice, find a way to share best practice. But another another role that I think OHCHR could play is to, and other civil society organizations could play, is to bring together private sector organizations that want to scale up their game and civil society. And so that's something I'll definitely think about. Okay. A question from Alexander Moreno. We say, will it be available in other languages, French? Well, it is actually available in French and in Spanish. What the issue we have had is we have not been able to format it. And it's really a question of finding someone to contract out to format it, because we have the translation, but it's not in that nice it's not in that nice format like inside the English version. So I was discussing with my colleague Ricky yesterday, and I think we found a contractor that can do it for us, and then we will print it in French and Spanish, and we will also do a landing page in French and Spanish. Our Portuguese friends have already translated it in Portuguese too. So we basically have a Portuguese, Spanish, and French version. We just need to spend some time formatting it and putting it online. Well, David of Workplace Pride is kindly mentioning that he will be showcasing the UN standards. We love the work of Workplace Pride. We think, it's extremely important for companies to have precise and concrete guidance on what it means to fulfill standard 1 and 2. And so constantly we are, what we want to do is to send them back to the existing mechanism to know how well you're doing, in terms of workplace environment when it comes to human rights of LGBTI people. But something that we would love to work with Workplace Pride too is how, and that's kind of for the future, once we have managed to raise a little bit awareness on the standards, is how can we monitor the performance of companies when it comes to that 5th standard acting in the public sphere. Because, something that is difficult to talk about is that there is always a risk of free riding, which means that there is such dividends in standing up for human rights of LGBTI people in the West. Now, if you talk about the United States, 71% of Americans, United States Americans, believe, approve of homosexual relationships. And so what it means is that if you're a company that posture yourself as supporting the global human rights of LGBTI people, you are actually going to get a lot of sympathy from your clients and from your shareholders. But how do we make sure that this translates into you using your influence to foster social change on LGBTI issues? We do not have that capacity at the United Nations, meaning that what we have the capacity to do is to put the UN standards out there and maybe help raise awareness. But at some point, civil society has to make that advocacy for companies to scale up their game. And so, and also to walk the talk. I'm not sure that's the expression, but to walk the talk, meaning taking concrete actions. So once we have finished this grand tour of raising awareness on the standard, I would love to sit with Workplace Pride and think about how we can foster accountability when it comes to global LGBTI rights. So from Mark, we will do what we can to promote. Thank you so much. You guys have done so much already. And then, so Alexander is telling that he's from Montreal, which is nice. We don't only have Americans, we also have Canadians. So Anthony Cotton of USAID, what is exciting about this standard is that even in countries considered to be closed space or closing spaces, private sector workplaces could be open spaces. Yeah, completely. That's actually what education described as this ambassador role for the private sector, which is, inside my walls, I'm actually showcasing what it means to respect human rights of LGBTI people, even in a hostile environment. Working this way, we're opening discrimination to different countries where traditional channels may be closed. It's a very good point. My question, what do you think are the strongest incentives for corporations to follow these standards? Improved outcomes in employee recruitment, retention, and morale, higher scores and indices that rank corporations' commitment to LGBTI inclusion, a positive corporate social responsibility story. I'm going to be very honest with you. Companies have a bad rap. In most parts of the world, companies are perceived as being the enemy. It's kind of sad, and I'm not sure how it happened, but financial companies are perceived as having created the economic crisis of 2008. Consumer goods companies are perceived as poisoning us one by one and getting us fatter every year. Extractive industry are perceived as destroying the environment, and the overall private sector is perceived as having taken the biggest chunk of GDP growth, while wages are remaining stable or going down. So companies are not, companies are keenly aware that they are facing reputational issues, and that has tremendous consequences for them, because in turn, what happened is that individuals are putting pressure on governments and lawmakers to put tighter regulations around companies, regulations that companies do not want to see. And there is brands can be boycotted if they are perceived as not playing a positive role in society. So I believe that in the West, there is a strong incentive as showing that you are contributing to a better world. And so I find that companies are interested to be better. The reason is very simple. It's free. If you want to move your pipeline to ensure that you are not getting in the way of a well-reproductive route, you have to dole out $300 million. But saying, in a VIP dinner in New York, I stand for the human rights of LGBTI people, that's free, and it gives you immediately a reputational boost. So our role and what we are trying to achieve with this standard is for companies to not only reap the benefits of appearing as being inclusive, but contribute to social change, which is urgently needed. Because in most parts of the world, LGBTI people live in hostile environments. We calculated, I think, that 37% of LGBTI people live in places where homosexuality is criminalized. So I think, companies, a lot of companies see the benefits of standing up for LGBTI issues. They don't always want to take that extra step that is difficult to take. The High Commissioner on Human Rights wrote an op-ed in CTM when we did the launch in London. And in the op-ed, he talks about Starbucks. And he said, well, Starbucks has always positioned itself as being extremely supportive of LGBTI issues globally. And then as soon as they experienced a backlash in Indonesia, they did a press release in local language in which the response was to say, well, we do not stand for any ideology. Instead of saying, we stand up for the human rights of LGBTI people, they say, we do not stand for any ideology. So there is always that risk of a double talk, and that's something that we want to achieve. But I agree with you. Companies that score very well on the HRC index, the Corporate Equality Index in the United States, it's good for the reputation, but it's also good for staff, and it's also good, for medium companies that are like, well, if those companies find benefit in being inclusive, then there is probably benefits for us too. Okay. So from our friends at the West, what can each of us do to promote the standards within our own company, and how can we best support you in your efforts? Well, thank you so much for offering. At this point, we really need to raise awareness on the standards and to kind of frame them as the United Nations Human Rights Office is telling companies that they have a responsibility to contribute to social change. And we have difficulties to do that. And one of the reasons, to be frank with you, is that it's not the sexiest topic on earth. Well, it's difficult to get press or to get exposure on talking about human rights and business. So any effort that civil society can do to raise awareness is more welcome. We have worked with my team very hard to try to get private sector to express support for the standard, and it's difficult. a lot of companies have said that they didn't want to express support. They have said that, it's the bar is too high, and or they have said, we have already expressed our values. Why do we have to reiterate our values? And as much as I have sympathy for those companies that don't really want to commit and don't really want to express support for yet another initiative, LGBTI people are besieged in many places of the world. And, if you look at Egypt, Azerbaijan, Chechnya, LGBTI people are the ones that are in trouble, not companies. And companies do have a responsibility. So, any help you can give us in getting more companies to express support is welcome. We are a kind bunch, so we are not pointing fingers at the companies that we have asked to express support and have told us no. But I think they will come around when they see that this is an important document, and that what we are trying to foster is a true movement from the sector. So any help in that area is welcome. And if you find forums in which we can raise awareness on the standard, we would love to hear about it. Do you think the use of the standards could be used as an indicator for the business climate for LGBTI people? Well, that's interesting. That's not something that is really covered that's not really something that is covered by the standards, but I agree that this is something that is important. There was a backlash a few years ago when Singapore was described by the Doing Business report of the World Bank as the best place to do business in the world. And the question was, how can it be the best place to do business in the world when it criminalizes homosexuality? There is a bit of a dichotomy, but there are other actors that are looking at this, which is, how inclusion and business climate intersect. And I'm actually very interested to see an upcoming study by Open for Business on how inclusion is driving growth in cities. And that cities like Hong Kong and Singapore need to attract the type of workforce that is actually extremely sensitive to inclusion. The tech-savvy, cosmopolitan population, highly educated population that is actually very interested in inclusive environments, and that performs better in inclusive environment. So there is an interconnection. There is a clear interconnection between business climate and inclusion of LGBTI people. There is one page in the document that talks about the business and economic case, but that's about it. But I think it's very important. It's an important topic. Great. Well, it's 11, so we are going to put an end to this first webinar. I cannot tell you how grateful we are that you took the time to join us and for your interest in the standard. We are really looking forward to work with anybody that is interested in this, and please stay in touch. And I talk to you very soon. Thank you again for taking the time this morning. Bye-bye.